group, which is a working group concerning issues. Sorry, my computer just tweaked. This is, good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Kathy Abercrombie. I'm one of the co-chairs of this working group. This is the working group concerning issues affecting deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind persons. I want to turn it over to my co-chairs to see if they have any opening comments. Representative Fusco?
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is John Fusco, State Representative, and obviously co-chair for this working group. Happy to be here. And I was just saying with Representative Abercrombie, what a tremendous amount of information that we've gathered. It's been very insightful and very helpful, and looking forward to today's meeting. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for your support on this also. And Representative Comey, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this working group. It's been, as we just said, very, very informative. And I think we uncovered a lot of gaps that we can sort of work on starting to fill. So I'm looking forward to being a part of that work going forward. So thank you. And I will be leaving the meeting a little bit early. I have a doctor's appointment. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you, Representative. And just so everyone knows too, we also have Marie Grady, who is our LCO, which means she's our attorney that writes our legislation. So good morning, Marie. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Good morning.
Before we begin, because this is going to be our last meeting, I just wanted to give some opening remarks. I want to really take this opportunity to say thank you to everyone that has participated. I think that we have put together a very well-equipped group that brings something to the table, who has been very helpful in this process. So I want to thank the Hospital Association. I want to thank CHRO. I want to thank Disabilities Rights Connecticut. I want to thank Aging and Disabilities Committee for being here, because they're the ones that are going to have to implement some of the bills that go through their committee. But I really just want to take this opportunity to say thank you to everyone. I think we're all here for the same reason, is to look at this system of care that we have in place and see how we can make it better. Anytime that we think that we're at a place where we become complacent on legislation or good policy, as a state, that's how we get ourselves in trouble. So I want to say thank you to everyone that's been on this work group. Process-wise, what I'd like to do is go through the areas that we had our meetings on, kind of open it up to everybody on your thoughts. We have received, one of the things we decided to do was to send it out to CHRO, Disabilities Rights Connecticut, the Hospital Association, and ask them for their thoughts on legislation. Oh, there's Jeff. Hi, Jeff. And to ask them for their thoughts as to what are some of the policy changes we can make in the next session. I want to be really clear about something to everyone. We have a lot of material to go over, which my colleagues and myself are going over as we speak. I'd like to have our language written by the beginning, well, to Marie Grady, our LCO, by the beginning of January, because this is a short session, which means we gavel in February and we're out by May. And we literally have about 1 week to get our bills to the committees that of cognizance, right? So I don't think that we're going to do one bill that's going to encompass everything. I think that you're going to see a few bills because they have to go to different committees. Having said that, in the short session, all of the bills have to be committee bills. That's how the structure is set up, which means that the chairs have the full ability to either raise a concept or not, which means we have to talk to the chairs of the committees. Like, for example, if we do something through higher ed because of UConn, we have to talk to those chairs and see if they're willing to raise it in a short session. Now, having said that, I just want everybody to be aware that if they don't raise it, It's not because they don't believe in the concept. It's because in a short session, we really try to adhere to, one, the rules on what can be raised and what can't. And then two, depending on what they have going on, they may feel that it doesn't fit their agenda for this session. So I don't want anybody to feel that they're not going to be supported. They might feel that it's better to do it in a long session. If there's a fiscal note that will also impact whether this goes forward this session, or if it goes forward in the 2023 session, which is our long session, which is in layman terms, our budget session. So I just want everybody to be aware of what the process is. Does anybody have any questions on that piece at this point?
I have a question.
Sure. Good morning, Andrew.
Hello. For people who don't know me, I'm the Legislative Liaison for Aging and Disability Services. So we don't have, it's the short session, our agency has not submitted an agency bill. So, which is a bit unusual, but in the last few years, we got the things done technically that we needed to achieve. So just to be clear, I think what you said is any bills coming out of this group would be submitted through your good offices, however you direct and place them with other committees. Our agency won't be asked to be that pack horse. It'll be you guys on the legislative side.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, because you're the executive branch, which means all of your legislation has to go through the governor's office. We are the legislative branch. We are separation of branch, and we are, for lack of a better word, I always call us, we're the policy people, right? So yeah, I think it's more appropriate. This was something that we talked about, Representative Fusco and Representative Comey and myself. We think it's more appropriate for all of the bills to go through the legislative side. Having said that, Andrew, we've worked very well together through the year with you and Eldon, and we will definitely be sitting down with you and talking about how this impacts your agency, and then what other thoughts that you two have, because you've been part of this working group. And I'll say it again, we've worked really well through the years, so I don't believe that this is a time to change that process.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else on questions or comments about process? And if anyone, for some reason, their hand raised on their computer will not work, please just wave, because sometimes mine doesn't want to engage either, so who knows. I just want to make sure that I call on everyone that has some comments or thoughts going forward. So seeing no comments or thoughts on process, why don't we start? We're going to skip around a little bit on the agenda. So one of the things that I'd like to start with is higher education. I think that we had a really good meeting with UConn. UConn is very interested in supporting some of the proposals and some of the thoughts that were talked about in this group. They are in the process of putting together what they think that they can achieve at this point. They still have a process that they have to go through, but we are looking forward to seeing what their recommendations are. I'd like to hear from the group if there's any other areas under higher ed, now that we've all had the opportunity to think back to the meeting and how what some of the conversation is there anything that you feel was really important that we want to make sure that we take a look at going forward? Susan Yankee, good morning.
Good morning, everybody. I would love to, in the future, continue the discussion about transition, not just for IEPs, but for students that are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind with 504s. I don't know if BESB already has something. They already have, a policy with transition for students that are deafblind, but I'd be interested to see that wording that they have. But I know there are a lot of students that are transitioning out of high school with 504s who are deaf and hard of hearing that are being completely lost on their next steps because they're rolled into general education. So they're not being prepared to be 18 and have their and be on their own at a university or employment. And a lot of that has to do also with connecting them with BRS. And I know Alvin had discussed that he is outreaching to people, but I know my son wasn't given any transition, and neither was his best friend, who also is hard of hearing at the same high school. No one reached out to them. So just a future conversation.
Yeah, so Susan, we did ask for some information and we did get, and Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, did we send out the OLR report for 504?
I don't believe we sent that out yet, but I'm happy to do that.
Well, you don't have to do it right now because I want people to be able to participate here and not have to be going through it. So we're going to be sending, after this meeting, we're going to be sending a packet. Things were trickling in and we were trying to hold everything until the end so that you weren't getting, 50 pieces of different material trying to put it together. We thought it'd be better if we put a package together. And I believe, wow, today's only Tuesday, huh? Woo! The week's already gone away from me. I believe that we received the 504 report either on Friday or yesterday. So we'll make
yesterday reference.
it was okay. So I'm not crazy, a little, but that's okay. So we will send out what we received about 504s. Susan, I think the only thing that's going to be challenging is we did not have an informational section around SDE. So we didn't have the opportunity to get any feedback from them. I think it's going to be difficult in a short session to figure out what legislation needs to go forward when it comes to them. But what I would like to offer is I would be more than happy, and I'm going to speak for my colleagues also, to get a meeting. I have been talking to Brian, who is the director of special ed. He knows this is something that we're very interested in. I would be more than happy in January to get a meeting with SDE, yourself, and anyone else that's interested to really kind of talk about transitioning services, what our school district's doing, what should they be doing, and then also how 504s play into that. I was actually amazed at the fact that it really, 504s, the structure for 504s is so different than IEPs. And I was really amazed that it feels like these students are left lingering, in my opinion. And it's only because I've been involved on the other side, on the IEP side. I really never dug into or had a lot of calls about 504s. But as this process went on and we started to talk about the 504s, I really think that there's some work that can be done on that. Now, having said that, people need to also understand that this is also federally done, which means we have to be in compliance with federal law, which sometimes makes it difficult for us to tweak any program the way we would like to see it done. And I think, Jeff, you would be very, very important to this conversation because this is what you do, right? You have these students, you know where we need to, sorry, I hate when the screen blinks and the person I'm looking at kind of shifts. So Jeff, you just shifted 2 blocks over. But I think that you would be really helpful in this conversation going forward. So start to think about anything that we can do at this point to kind of look at adjusting the 504 plans or making them more efficient to the needs of the individuals that we represent. Does that sound good? Representative Fusco?
Yes, and you know what? I just make sure I'm not on mute. I wanted to applaud you for that. Thank you so very much. I think when we were talking about, the transitional phase between the IPs and the 504s, I could see your gears were spinning as we were having a conversation. And that is, that's a tremendous amount of work. That's not the work of one person, especially in short sessions, probably there's probably a level of impossibility there. But I think moving forward in the next session, I think hopefully we can get some people together who can really sit down and focus on that. Because I think there are some important questions that need to be answered there. And I think we can work forward in making those two issues integrate much, much better so we can help our students in the future. So thank you. Once again, I applaud your efforts for bringing that up. It's very, very important. Thank you for that.
Jeff, do you have your hand raised? Yep.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. And a special thank you to Representatives Abercrombie and Fusco for taking on this working group. I feel like our discussions, our conversations have been very productive. It's been nice to see progress and to be heard and to have such great support for our community. So I really appreciate that. Now, in regards to the higher ed piece, I mean, I do have other things I'd like to address at some point, but for now, the higher ed piece, I thought UConn did a great presentation. And I'm also curious what bills are being considered, but I don't think there's anything specific that needs to be proposed at this point. But in terms of the university system in Connecticut, it might be worthwhile to reach out given the pandemic and staff shortages I know are just huge. I mean, everywhere, but particularly for us. And I mean, I have never experienced the amount of vacancies that I currently have. We can't bring in new students. You know, we're missing really key roles in our organization and we have 0 applicants for these roles.
Wow.
So I'm wondering about leveraging the university system for those purposes. And trying to reach out to the colleges and the universities and, you know, those maybe majoring in education or mental health or counseling and trying to develop some type of internship opportunities. I mean, it's a great problem to have in a way, right? But at the same time, I'm looking at students who need us and we can't provide services for them because of these shortages. So over the next few weeks, I'm hoping to see some movement as well. A lot of staffing issues are because of the DCF background checks, which just, you know, take longer than ever, but they were already long to begin with. But the bottom line is we do need to establish some type of pipeline. That way we can meet the needs of these deaf and hard of hearing students. So I guess that's what I would ask of the representatives who are here with us today. If you have connections or contacts at these universities, or can even help guide me with who to contact, I would really appreciate it so we could get this pipeline in the works.
So 2 comments to that, Jeff. I'm also part of a couple of other working groups, and one has to do with the mental health portion that I know is really near and dear to your heart personally. And so one of the things that we are looking at, and I think one of the comments I heard yesterday from the agencies and from my colleagues, because we had an appropriations meeting around the dollars that were put in the budget and the ARPA dollars and where are those dollars being spent. One of the categories that we identified is the workforce, right? And what's being done. And I have to tell you that I was amazed at the amount of dollars that are going into the workforce pipeline, like you said, to try and transition people into jobs that are so at a loss right now, especially in the healthcare field. So they're looking at being able to, in the university system, there's a criteria that has to be met for individuals to be able to teach, right? And then, especially in like the nursing field, right? It's a high level of education that they need. What we're looking at is, can we, for the short period, be able to use other staff in the educational system at the university to be able to get these kids into these pipelines? We have over 7,000 students right now that are trying to get into nursing, and they can't get in there because we don't have enough educators. 7,000. And then we talk about a workforce shortage. So I think your conversations around the workforce, you know, and where do we go here will be definitely part of the workforce conversation that's going on at the state level. Having said that, you know, we're also looking at, is this the time for the state to do some forgiveness loans to keep people here? I will tell you, Jeff, I have never I have never seen our system as overwhelmed, and I think you're feeling it too, as we are right now. And I think as policymakers, we are really trying to figure out in the next legislative session, what's the best way for us to proceed. But I will tell you that the workforce is on the forefront for all of us. And how do we streamline some of these educational opportunities, right? Do we start with students that are in their third year getting into their fourth year for graduation, right? And do we start to put them in the workforce, and start to get them where they're working in these fields so that when they graduate, sort of like what they do in the manufacturing from the technical high schools, right? These kids start their senior year, right? So that once they graduate, they're able to go right into their work fields because the majority of this businesses take them right away. So we're also looking at that in different areas, especially the healthcare field. So any thoughts, right? Because your thoughts on this issue are really important because you're on the forefront of this. Any thoughts you have as to what areas that we really need to, for job descriptions, look at? And if you know of any other states that have tried to streamline some of these educational opportunities, that would be really helpful. Because I think for us as policymakers, we have a lot to tackle in the next session. And I just want to make sure that all of your thoughts we hear before we go forward. Yes, Jeff.
What the representative was saying in regards to the 504. I did want that to be an issue we addressed right now, but knowing that it is a short session and there are so many issues in regards to it, I do agree that, in the next working force group that, we certainly do need to focus on the education portion of it because there is so much that we can discuss going forward during a longer session and have the opportunity to address those issues. So if we could ensure that that is, a high item on the agenda for next session, that would be great.
Yeah, and we have to look at what we're getting for thoughts on the 504, and then we also have to have it connect what the federal law says to see what we can change in that. But I have been talking to Brian offline a little bit about that. So I can't guarantee what we can do in the next session because I'll be honest with you, it's not my field of expertise. So I don't want to give false promise out there, but I can tell you that the conversation's been started. SDE is well aware of that. And we will make sure the people that need to be at the table will be at the table so that we can figure out if there's anything that we can do in the next legislative session. Robin, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did for a second. I think what Jeff, were you at the UConn presentation or was that the day you weren't there?
No, I was there for the UConn presentation. Yeah. I think what I missed was the mental health presentation, but I had sent 2 of my staff members to attend in lieu of me for that discussion.
Okay. So I think that Diane Lilo, Dr. Lilo Martin would be a great person for you if you haven't already reached out to her to
Oh yeah. Diane Lilo Martin, she served on our board as well for the disclosure purposes. So I do, make sure that we are aware. So we are connected on many different fronts. UConn is really growing as a program amazingly, and I do think it's a great thing. The only thing that, I think is missing that we're looking for is out of all that growth, how much are actually in the education field, how much are in the mental health field. And I think, that connection is a piece that is missing right now. And it certainly isn't just UConn. And I think that's important. Even looking at the community colleges, UConn serves, like I said, the counseling, social working, teachers. However, in regards to our residential care and teaching aides and so on, those are likely going to come out of our community college on, more strongly. So that's really seems to be a weakness that we need to focus on, where there's not much being provided to them at this point, and there's not a point person. I did reach out to someone at CCSU who told me that their program has been closed for the last few years. So, I do think the problem here is figuring out where the connections need to be developed at that level as well, because I know that, each college does have, different groups. And so getting that pipeline in play is really where I'm hoping to go.
Any other thoughts? Hi, Harvey. Good morning.
Hi, I just wanted to add that, I agree with Jeff in regards to it being time for us to kind of figure out with some possible solutions, connecting that 504 and the IEP programs, especially with the federal law and regulations, having these, different ways of being interpreted. And in special ed, we're talking about kind of special ed identities, designs, and instructions. And so all of those things, along with the access, are given in that IEP. But the 504, it seems as if those things are not viewed as being required or with any sort of specially designed instructions. And then one thing that seems to be lacking in Connecticut is that access piece, where it's supposed to be part of that 504. And, a lot of deaf students need that access in order to function in their 504 setting, and it's being overlooked. So, having to understand the similarities and differences between those two things really does take time, and being able to then really develop the appropriate design to be able to offer them the opportunity to transition from an IEP to a 504 or vice versa, but maintaining that access throughout. Otherwise, basically they're in an educational setting with no access, and there are things like that we really need to be looking at closely. And so providing the time in order to create some proposals to resolve these issues is definitely key. Thank you.
And if I could just add, I don't want to take too much time on this because I know we have other important topics that we need to get to. But one thing I just wanted to make note of and not lose sight of, it pertains more to, there's also this issue of diversity, and specifically talking about people of color. And the reason I mention that is because we're facing issues here at ASD where we do have a diversity task force, and there are efforts being made to address diversity because the equity amongst the diversity of our staff it's not equitable currently. And there are different levels of employment at ASD. And so those people aren't always being represented at all of those levels. And we want to provide opportunities here at ASD, but, to become, again, looking for teachers or looking for professionals, we're struggling to get any applicants, let alone applicants of color. And so I know that it might seem like somewhat of a separate issue, but I think that also it aligns with addressing this with the universities and colleges, because we need to make sure that they're addressing the diversity issues as well. We need to make sure that they're uplifting and bringing in communities of color into their student body, so that way, eventually our workforces will continue that diversity as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jeff. So thank you for that. The only other thing that I was going through all of the notes that we took. A couple of things that were left out of the conversation were, Heather, did we ever get from Brian a comment about communication counselors Jeff had raised that issue that that's what they're calling these individuals in the school systems that should be interpreters. Did we ever get a response from Brian around that question?
Brian was-
Communication facilitators? Do you mean communication facilitators?
Yes.
Yeah, Brian did respond to the chairs, and he gave a report. I don't know that he addressed that specifically, but while you are continuing the meeting, I'll just look at that in a little more detail to see if he mentions that.
Okay, thank you. Because that was one of the other things that I had that we wanted to clarify, because I think it was you, Jeff, that had brought that up. And we just want to make sure, I think it goes to what you're saying, that either through an IEP or a 504, the student should have the appropriate individual who is supporting them in the school district. So we will continue that conversation and, decide where we go from here with that. The other thing we talked about was collecting data under 504s with individuals with disabilities. And I think Brian's response was that they collect data, but they don't break it down by categories. So that was another conversation that I think that we need to continue. I know that they are working on changing their data collection because a lot has to do with what's happened with COVID. And I think with this new commissioner, who I will say that I am absolutely thrilled that she's the commissioner, because I've worked with Charlene for many, many years, especially around adult ed and things like that. I think she gets it, which is really good for us. So I think that conversation will continue. And I think it's good to raise these issues with SDE and have them start to think about them, right? So thank you to all of you for that. Robin?
Okay. The other thing that he sent along is that the CSDE is in the process of finalizing a what looked like 38-page resource guide for folks called Educating Students Who Are Deaf, Hard of Hearing, or Deafblind, Guidance Addressing Assessment, Programs, and Practices. So that is something that is going to be coming out shortly, and perhaps, I mean, I don't know who is looking at that with him and working on that with him, but maybe we can just reach out to them to try to, see if before they make it final that there's not anything that's missing or not covered.
Yeah, if you want to take the lead on that, Robin, because you and Susan have been working so closely on the education piece, that would be great. Susan?
Hi, Representative Comey, if you would just make sure within their practices, they're including an overview of emergency practices for students that are deaf and hard of hearing, because teachers are still reaching out to me for that guidance.
Susan, are you saying the legislation that we did a couple of years ago, they haven't implemented? Didn't we do that about emergency?
They did, but they're not training the teachers. They're not giving them, the basic things that they can ask for, to help in the student in the emergency. So I just gave a talk to teachers of practice, my presentation on what I have developed, but I also reached out to the state to talk to them about the new Annex M. And I was thinking that there should be somebody on the School Safety and Security Committee that is communicating with the teachers that are working with students that have hearing loss on emergency plans. Somehow those teachers should be included, because teachers felt that they didn't know how to address their administration to ask for things. So they knew what they needed, but they didn't know how to go about getting it. And they also were concerned that they walk into an IEP and it's really hard to prepare for an emergency plan that has to be put together in an IEP or a 504 right on the spot. So, but I just want to make sure that that's kind of included in there.
And Robin, if you, it might be a good segue for you to be able to have a meeting with Brian and bring Susan in and let her explain what's really going on, you know, and that she is being contacted by teachers to try and understand what the policy is and how they're supposed to move that forward. So thank you, Susan, for being our ears when it comes to the educational piece. We really do appreciate that. Between you and Jeff, I think we're in good hands. Barbara Katzen, I see your hand raised. Good morning.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. You know, as we were discussing this, I think ASD has state-of-the-art technology that's currently been put in, and maybe it's a great opportunity for that to be the location where the training happens, or, you know, whether Jeff is willing to take the lead on kind of just showing what they've put in here, so that those visuals that have been implemented in the building in regards to the safety and security could be great for other educators to see and maybe, you know, take ideas from.
That's a great idea, Jeff.
We did have a training that I had sent out to the different public schools a couple of years ago. It was right before COVID hit. I want to say that a lot of the districts didn't send people out to the training, but we did have a group of people who did attend. It was a wonderful training. And then I think that basically what we've heard is since COVID, you know, everyone's feeling overwhelmed, and they've kind of put those things on the sidelines, and those trainings have been kind of overlooked. And I do think that, you know, unfortunately, it goes back to that same issue that's been brought up in the past, where we have these meetings for these deaf and hard of hearing children, and they just don't have the appropriate people who attend the meetings. You know, people who are deaf, people who work in the deaf field should be at those meetings. That way they can be asked, you know, what can we do for this child, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, for so to speak, you know. And I think that's where the problem lies, really. It's an ongoing problem, the same one we discussed 4 years ago. And that would be my kind of direct answer here.
Thank you, Jeff. Alvin?
Yes. So I went to a couple of the other school districts recently and was doing some advocating for some parents of, you know, children with hearing loss. A lot of the schools were unfamiliar with the emergency practices, and that's kind of where I was kind of able to provide some counseling. I did mention the fact that, you know, American School for the Deaf does have a great emergency practices plan in place, along with great equipment. I advised that maybe the districts, you know, stop by and check it out. So the conversations are happening.
Thank you, Alvin. Susan?
Just quick. So American School for the Deaf does have the best of everything, but what I'm being approached by are teachers with schools that don't have the ability to hire someone like Layered Solutions to do the state-of-the-art technology, including my son's own school. And we're in Madison, and they did not have strobes. They didn't have TVs that could scroll information, and they weren't really willing to make that change. They didn't know about, maybe they weren't granting situations, but really the bells and whistles are amazing, but we have to have like the basic for the schools that just don't have the bells and whistles.
And I think that, Susan, with the ARPA dollars that they received, the ESSER and SC, I know all this alphabet soup, there was an opportunity for them to be able to get some of this equipment that they need. So, you know, that's something that we can raise at SDE to make sure that school districts are aware of that. There's still, because SDE had about $1.4 billion that they were able to use for the schools, and they have not allocated all those dollars. So this might be an opportunity to be able to get some of that equipment, which they can use these ARPA dollars for. Louise, did you? Oh, there she is. Good. Okay. Louisa, sorry.
Hi, yes, good morning, everyone. So nice to be back with this group. I know I was out for a while, but it's nice to be back with everyone. So as Vice President of Hands and Voices for the Connecticut chapter, we make an effort to encourage parents to reach out, and we try to educate them on how to advocate for themselves and their children in regards to IEPs and 504s. But then with COVID happening, it's made that sort of more difficult and cumbersome. And due to confidentiality, sometimes we're not able to get information of those parents who might be navigating the public school system, who might need our help. We do try to have a robust network so that we can provide trainings and get that information out so that they're able to be aware of what services are available for their deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind children. And again, we know ASD, knows what they're doing a little bit more, but I'm thinking of those parents who might be lost within the public school system, trying to navigate these language and communication plans with the schools, but it's not always done as it should be, especially because the public schools, if they're on a 504, they might get an interpreter, but that's only if the parents really are savvy with the system and how to navigate it and can advocate for their student. And the parents are supporting their child to get those services even through college. But once they get to that point, usually in the college system, it's not a problem. But the public school system, the point is that there needs to be partnership with families and parents, and we need to make sure that we're supporting them and advocating for themselves and their children.
And I think that's a continuous issue across the spectrum of anybody with a disability, is connecting families to resources that are out there, right? What advocacy groups are out there that can walk them through a process? And I'll be honest with you, Louisa, you're absolutely right. I've been doing this. I've been human services for 16 years. We haven't found a really good system in place to do that. One of the things that I've always told advocacy groups and parents is use your PTOs or PTAs or whatever they call them, because everybody's got their own alphabet soup. But there's an opportunity there to invite families, right? And to bring in experts in these areas, right? To educate everyone, right? Because schools are communities. And I know that everybody wants to help all the students. So I think it's a great avenue for families to pursue. So I always say, reach out to your PTO, see if they're willing to do, and I always call them like subject matter informational forum to connect them. I don't know, unless you have an idea, I don't know how else you connect families, because there really is a privacy under 504s and IEPs that I think that school districts have to be very careful about. And I think that it's, we can't legislate that they do this. So I think it's up to families, right? As you talk to families to reach out to their school community and say, hey, this is a child in your community and I'm asking for your help. So I would love to hear other people's thoughts on how do we do that with families. Representative Comey?
I've had a lot of experience advocating for my child at the ground level with the food allergies, and we put in policy in our town's policy that the district was responsible for identifying children with the disability in order and to offer them a 504 plan. And that worked for exactly 1 year. And then, we left the school, and I don't believe that they're doing that. And now, it's up to the parents to know what their rights are and to advocate for any 504 plan. So, as you mentioned, the best intended policies that we worked so hard, over a 3-year period, and only lasted as long as the people who wanted them in the building were in the district.
Did you have a SEPTA, which is a special education PTA at your school?
No.
So that's another area to get the word out, because I know there are some school districts that do that very well. They might be a point to help families because that's what their role is. I'm just trying to think, how do we share these thoughts and ideas with families, right? And let them know, one, what their rights are, which is always an issue, right, with any person with a disability. And then where do they go from there, right? So I think you're right, Louisa. That's what we're trying to figure out. How do we navigate that? Jeff?
Yeah, I think everyone who has spoken on this has been correct in that we do need to continue to advocate for this. But honestly, I think those special education PTAs are great, but I know that there are also some who, for lack of a better word, sometimes think that because they have that title of being a special ed parent or something, that they also have expertise in that area. And sometimes they don't, and they don't advocate for the most appropriate things, because although you might be an expert in special ed in a general sense, it doesn't mean that you have expertise in all of the subfields of special education. So you might, know about special education, but you got exposed to an hour of deaf ed in your special education course through college. You don't have that sort of niche expertise that is necessary sometimes for guiding parents. So sometimes I'm a little leery of these groups, who provide training or who claim some type of special ed expertise, because we want to make sure that we have that specific niche expertise that we're really looking for.
And so, Jeff, if you have a thought as to statutorily how we could identify what qualifications that person should have, that might be helpful, because I don't know off the top of my head how we would write that. Like, what you guys know better, what the job description should be, for lack of a better word. So if you have thoughts on that, please send it. I would be more than happy to, run it by Brian and get at SDE and get his thoughts on that. But I think that that's a really important part of it. It also goes to what you were talking about, which is who in the school districts is doing this work, right? And are they really qualified to do it? So I think that where we just need to be careful, right, is that there's a lack of staff to do this work right now, right? And so we need to be careful whenever we tweak statutory language and do job descriptions. Are we going to put some school districts at a loss, which is also going to put the students? And I get it. There's a balance here. And that's what I'm trying to, err on the side of caution with that, because I've seen unforeseen consequences because of that, right? So just because somebody doesn't have a degree behind their name in a field doesn't necessarily mean that they're not equipped to do this. And I don't want to leave any school district or any child that's really in a good place with whoever's supporting that, right? You see exactly what I'm saying. So if you have thoughts on it, we
Yep.
would love that. But that's always my concern. Go ahead, Jeff.
No, sorry, I don't mean to laugh. It's just we are on the same page, and you've made very good points. This is a type of conversation I've had in the past when we were working on the development of those language and communication plans. There were a lot of conversations around who should be at the table, who should be in those meetings. And I know we did designate a specific list of people. And I think it ended up being limited just to those who are qualified as teachers of the deaf or hard of hearing. You know, and there's even some sort of controversy and discussion to be had about that. But for PPT meetings, we thought having teachers of the deaf and hard of hearing would be sufficient for now, hoping that that would ultimately lead to further resources, you know, where maybe once they had those connections to places like SoundBridge or ASD or what have you, then they would be able to branch out their network. But just having that initial support at the meeting to provide those connections would be paramount. And we were thinking that that was at least better than what they minimally have now.
Yeah, and this might be an opportunity as we're talking about the workforce to look at what that really looks like, right? And is this an opportunity for us to continue that conversation and also enhance it by understanding who is doing this in the school systems, right? And are there other individuals out there that can still do this work, but don't necessarily have that higher level of degree? So I think you're absolutely right. I think it's an opportunity to look at the system and see how we can make it better. Any other conversations around higher ed, SDE, that you think that we didn't touch on and that you want to make sure that we have the conversation around it? Yes, Jeff?
Yeah, I don't think that we've missed anything necessarily, but I just want to reinforce what I said before, and that there are several other issues outside of this realm that need to be addressed. And maybe it's better for a different conversation, but I do want to make sure that they get brought up at some point. One of them being the least restrictive environment definition, placement, assessment. I mean, there's a slew of issues that need to be addressed, but I think that that might be a better conversation to have after the next session. That way we can use that to strategize for the long session coming up subsequently.
And I know that Susan Yankee, and I'm going to volunteer her here, is not going anywhere. And I'm sure that her and Representative Comey are going to continue this conversation. So I'm sure that, Jeff, that they're going to bring you in on this conversation and continue the dialogue, right? Because we have, I'm going to say it again, we have an opportunity here to look at the system that's in place and to make it better, right? And yes, it may take a couple of years, but in my opinion, that's okay, because good policy is worth waiting for instead of doing a little tweak, because I always are of the mind, do no harm. And sometimes there are unforeseen consequences just because we want to get a bill out there. So I think sometimes it's worth taking time to do it right. And I think that we've got some very capable people on this Zoom that are interested in it. And my colleague, Representative Comey, has been talking about this well before we were working on this working group. So I know it's near and dear to her heart. I know that Susan has been such a great resource. And I want to say thank you to Susan, because you were also on the advisory council for the deaf, and you know, your knowledge as a parent, good policy comes from people that live it. And you've explained exactly how the system works and how the system doesn't work. And that's really important as we put policy forward, because it's really strong when you're trying to convince agencies to make changes, because they can talk about anecdotally everything that they know, right? But for someone that lives it, and just like Jeff, you know, because of the School for the Deaf, you can really convince them what policies need to be changed. So thank you guys for that. We really do appreciate it. Any other thoughts or comments on the higher ed, SDE, education as a whole? Seeing none. I just want to make sure I don't see any hands raised that I missed.
I guess just quickly, I would say, I do need to step out very briefly. I have to deal with an emergency, but I will be back for sure because I don't want to miss the rest of this conversation. So I just wanted to let
Okay.
you all know that. Thank you.
No problem, Jeff, and we will bring you up to speed when you get back. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
So now we'll move on to the mental health portion of this. And so I think that the mental health portion is going to be a little bit more challenging legislatively because of the lack of workforce that we have in the state currently. And it's only getting worse in the healthcare field because of the pandemic. So first, let me open it up to the conversation and your thoughts, and then I will give you some of my thoughts around that issue. Jim?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. And first, thank you, Representative Abercrombie, Representative Comey, and Representative Fusco for this process. It has been, I think, enormously productive, and your willingness to spend time doing the deep dive is much appreciated. So thank you. In terms of the mental health piece, we had a general recommendation that covers a variety of different areas, but knowing this is going to be a difficult one, I think one of the easy things we can do is to let everybody know what the existing services are. And we heard a little bit of that as we were talking through the education area, where some parents not knowing what some of the programs are or where the resources are. And one of our recommendations was to create a single website, a single web page that would list all of the services available in the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, the Department of Children and Families, the Department of Aging and Disabilities, and now I see we didn't even go broad enough, probably the Department of Education, and have that web page put on all the same web page on everybody's website. So you're looking on the Department of Children and Families, and it's the same list with links of all the services that you would find on DEMIS as a sort of to try to do this in an efficient and recognizing the budget issues way, as opposed to when we talked about a central agency a lot, but this would give us a central place to find all of the services. And I know it's challenging to add new services, but I think the least we can do is let everybody know where and how they can access existing services. I think that would be really important. I also just want to second or amplify your thoughts on the workforce shortage. It is exactly as you describe it. And as we go through this conversation, this session, we will be obviously from the perspective of the hospitals and health systems talking about the workforce shortage on a clinical basis, but we will also be including a shortage of interpreters. So we can't, as we talk about workforce shortage, we must talk about them as well. But so one of the ways to not is to let everybody know what the existing services are, and that was our recommendation on a sort of an efficient way to do that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. I thought that was a great idea. And I think that's basically a simple fix for agencies, right? And I think it gives families and individuals in the community who are looking for resources, you go on a website for DEMIS and then you find out, oh, this is where I go. So I think you're absolutely right. I think that's definitely something that we're going to be talking to the agencies about. So thank you for that. And then if you have any thoughts, Jim, from the hospital's point of view around the workforce, that would be really helpful, because I know that you guys are also connected, I would assume, to the higher ed portion, right? Because these are your employees. So as we think about this, I know that you guys have been working on this, for a while now. I would say probably all of 2021, because we really have seen this from the beginning, right? Because 2020 was just so difficult for everyone. So your thoughts on that would be greatly appreciated also.
And we have provided leadership after the speaker's behavioral health forum with behavioral health recommendations, which touched on workforce shortage. We're amplifying those workforce shortage recommendations, and they will be out shortly, and we'll make sure that we send them your way and the committee's way.
That'd be great. Thank you. Maritza?
Hello, thank you, Chair Abercrombie and all the other representatives here. My name is Marissa Rivera. I'm an advocate from Disability Rights Connecticut. Disability Rights Connecticut did submit a list, I'll say a list of recommendations. I just not sure if you want me to, it's a little bit long or lengthy under the mental health. We have about 9 different areas where we've identified gaps, and I'm sure there are more, but we've also put in some sort of recommendations or ideas. Is this sufficient, just that list that we sent out to everybody?
So we just, and Heather, correct me if I'm wrong, that list just went out this morning?
Yes, it did. Yeah,
Okay.
yes, thank
So
you.
Maritza, I think it is appropriate for you to kind of go through that list and give everyone just an update as to what your thoughts were. And then from there, I'd love to open up the conversation as to what this group thinks are maybe some of the priorities. I'm not sure all of it will be able to get done in this session, but I think it's a really great place to start. Do you want to share your screen? How do you want to proceed? You guys tell me.
I can try sharing my screen. If
Or
that's
Heather,
okay.
is it easier for you, Heather, to do it?
I just enabled it for Marissa to share hers.
Oh,
If she has any difficulty, I'd be happy to do it on my end.
All
Okay,
right.
and right before you start, Maritza, Representative Fusco, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, no, I just wanted to thank you for bringing that up, because we did just get that this morning and it's been a little hectic, so I didn't have time to review that. So this is very important. And I'm going to say that just overall, Marissa, you have brought invaluable proceedings, I will tell you. I learned a lot from you, and so I'm anxious to hear what you have to say about the report that you sent us this morning. So thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
Maritza, I was on a call with your boss yesterday, and I just want you to know I told her how fabulous you are. So, because you've done a great job, and I told her how lucky we were to have you on this working group. So, I just wanted you to be aware that we do appreciate all your work on this group. So, yes, if you want to share your screen, that would be great.
All right. Yes. Thank you for that as well. It's always nice to have compliments be going up to the boss. So there's 9 different points. I think it would be definitely up to the group or whoever to determine what is priority wise. And I will say you may have to define, some may take more resources to develop than others. Here, from our point of view, here's what we're seeing is, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with language proficiency or language disfluency. It is a situation where in the hearing world, I guess I would explain it as severe abuse and neglect. If you're a hearing person and you were pretty much sheltered from, language, you might develop some sort of language disfluency and not sure how to use language to communicate. In the deaf and hard of hearing world, you don't have to be as severely removed. However, you may not get that stimulation in language. And what we would say is there's not enough American Sign Language to develop during those critical periods of development for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. And this is kind of a widespread amount of people. It happens more often than we think it's not happening. And this is where we're giving a recommendation for the areas of mental health because many high percentage of this population of people who didn't grow up with sign language or any sort of language are in need of mental health services. But a lot of mental health providers, one, are just fighting to get accessible resources, but they're additionally trying to understand how to work with people who are deaf, hard of hearing, or deafblind, who may not even be fluent in any sort of language, and provide them means of support. So this is sort of our recommendation of possibly having DEMIS or some other agency working together to develop these sort of resources and how to work with people who aren't fluent in any language and how to provide mental health resources. Again, this would probably take quite a bit of resources to develop, but there are resources out there. I know Alabama has definitely been leading this on providing those sort of services. And in addition to that is the communication assessments. Some hospitals, which is great, are doing what we call communication assessments once someone comes in the door of, okay, what's your communication need? Are you English proficient? Do you need a sign language interpreter? Is it for you? Is it for your companion? But not all hospitals are doing this, only some. So that's something that we would like to probably see some sort of standard in the state of Connecticut for these sort of language assessments, so that people can identify what's the appropriate services and what they need to provide. The next one is, and do you want me to just kind of run through them all and then people can ask questions afterwards?
Yeah, I think that would be the best way to proceed. Thank you.
Okay. The next part is definitely in emergency medical situations. We don't have a system in Connecticut to locate interpreters in emergency medical settings. We used to have 211. Currently, we don't have any sort of operating agency that can help identify, a sign language interpreter currently. So that's something to bring to the attention of the state of Connecticut. Is this is a huge issue. Something needs to be done. The third one is lack of identified mental health providers who know sign language. So we're coming from the viewpoint of, it seems like a lot of people in the deaf community would prefer to speak or communicate or get mental health services with someone else who's also fluent in sign language, American Sign Language, getting that kind of direct support. And it's a bit difficult to be able to define who's fluent in sign language. And it's also difficult to locate providers who are fluent in sign language. And this causes sort of a gap in services, because not only are people trying to seek mental health services, but they're also trying to seek either additional services or people who can actually directly communicate in sign language with them to provide these services. So we're proposing that, this idea that maybe there could be a compiled list of people who are mental health providers who are also fluent in sign language, and to maybe better define what ASL fluent is, just because we want to make sure that people get quality services in mental health settings. So that's another one. Another one is, and I'm sure CHA is already involved with this, Jim Acabelos, internet access. We know that the dependency on internet is just going to keep increasing in the state of Connecticut. It's here. Video remote interpreting is here. And we understand the dependency on video remote interpreting because, one, it's readily available. Two, you can use it at any time that you need to use it. And the problem is what we're hearing from hospitals is that it's hard to get in-person interpreters. So if it's hard to get in-person interpreters and VRI is always there, people are going to start leaning towards the VRI system. Of course, there's a lot of things that need to be improved on making sure that we have a number of available medical interpreters, but we also want to say that the VRI system itself, even though it's increasingly being used, probably at 3x the amount at, we can say, at one hospital than in-person interpreters, then the systems for providing VRI interpreting needs to improve as well. And a large percentage of our complaints is that these services freeze, and it's people who are experiencing mental health emergencies. They need help. They want to talk to somebody. They're in severe emergency need, and these systems are failing them. And there's not any sort of systemic means to really improve it. And this is something we would like to push, some sort of standards, some sort of oversight, that if these VRI devices are going to be used, then there needs to be a quality attached to that. So, and we've put together some resources there. Another part is patient safety. I will say that Department of Public Health, of course, they're busy. You know, they need to be looking at all the medical institutions. However, we're seeing that a lot of mental health institutions or places to provide treatment are not actually safe for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind. And what we mean by safe is we have seen people who are deaf who are on a medical psychiatric unit, and announcements are being made. You know, hello, excuse me, everybody back to their room, or hi, lunch is called, you know, whatever announcements are made, and they don't know what's going on. This is what we would say is, this is a issue of patient safety for people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind. We're seeing that there's not any sort of video phone installed in the unit, so they can't call out. They can't contact, say, for example, Disability Rights Connecticut. They're having to use personal cell phones. Any sort of means of communication, they may be taken away because they're not, you know, because they don't have an accessible environment to an interpreter to attend groups. Anyways, I can go on and on. Point is being that these institutions and places of mental health treatment are majorly behind in providing accessible mental health care in terms of safety for this population. So that's something we would push for in improving. Another part is we want to know the reports. What is going on in healthcare treatment for people who are with limited English proficiency? We want to know the numbers, what's happening, what's being resulted, because we have heard of people having that, more people are ending up in the emergency room who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind because they're unable to get interpreters for their medical providers. They're having to reschedule and cancel their appointments because interpreters aren't able to show up. So there's just seems to be a domino effect in having these emergency hospitals become almost the only place of care because other primary care doctors are just, they're not providing these accessible needs. So anyways, what we're trying to say is there needs to be numbers. We need to understand how many people is this impacting, what are the results, and you know, if it's getting to be a serious situation where there's a huge people who are being systemically held back from being provided healthcare or mental health services, we need to know about it, but we need numbers. So.
Marissa, can I just stop you for 1 minute? Jeff, we're going to take questions at the end. So I just want to make sure that you are aware of that, okay?
Okay, I'll go ahead. Another part is we are concerned when there's police called for people who may be having a mental health crisis, who are deaf. We know that these officers most of the time don't have the resources or are not aware of the resources to call for an interpreter or to know how to work with someone who is deaf. And so one of the things we've identified this as an issue. What Connecticut wants to do to address this issue, that's sort of up to you guys, but we have had experience in Washington, D.C. where they had a liaison unit from the community that police officers could call on to help address people from certain communities. And in the area of Washington, D.C., they had different liaison units, one for the Spanish speaking population, one for the Black African American population, just to develop some sort of community policing with these different aspects. So this is, there's a lot of ways to support this, and hopefully identifying or some resources to fix this gap. Another one is lack of state-funded reimbursement for communication aids and services provided in healthcare settings. What this basically means is a lot of people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind, may use Husky or any sort of state-funded services or funding to get medical care. The only issue is that when they're going to providers and saying, hi, I need medical care, and I also need these auxiliary aids and services, such as an interpreter, sometimes hospitals will be like, well, this is kind of too much, or other mental health providers might say, look, we can't even pay for these interpreters. We can't even provide you. It's not the issue of getting the mental health services, but it's in paying for the interpreters or other auxiliary aids and services that seem to be an issue for a lot of these providers. And, I know of a situation several times where people have been scheduled for mental health counseling and for, say, 9 sessions. And after the 3rd session, everything's canceled because, the provider's like, I can't even pay for these interpreters. I just can't. So we're not going to provide mental health services. And this is an issue that is impacting a lot of people who are deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind in the community and getting these much needed services. So if there is some sort of reimbursement or some sort of agreement for people who are on these state funded services, such as Husky or Medicaid, maybe this could be sort of a carrot to say, no, go ahead and provide these mental health services. And also we will help offset the cost for these interpreter services if that is a financial barrier in some sort. So this is another one, which is a lack of public announcements from the state of Connecticut about healthcare providers' responsibility to provide effective communication and qualified sign language interpreters. When people call my office, it's either mental health providers, medical providers, and deaf people themselves going, what are my rights? I know there's something here. I know I'm obligated to have sign language interpreters. There's just not enough information on the state's website about the mental health responsibility to provide these interpreters, to provide auxiliary aids and services. And what we're asking is that the state identify this as a need that many people are asking for on both sides, deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind people and providers, to sort of easy print information to kind of explain, yes, if you need an interpreter, here's the list where you can find the list of interpreters. Here's, agencies that you can contact to find an interpreter. Yes, we have here in law that you do need to provide auxiliary aids and services. It is your responsibility. There just needs to be more information readily available for everybody on this issue. So anyways, those are the 9 points. Of course, they're not inclusive of everything. There's, I'm sure, tons more that could be discussed. But in the time that we had, these were the 9 that we identified in our experience of seeing what's going on. So thank
Marissa,
you.
I think you had higher ed and workforce development, or?
Yes, I did, but I figure, I wasn't sure when to cover it. So I can cover the next one.
Yeah, why don't you continue?
Okay.
Because we're open to the whole conversation.
Okay. Did you want me to stop and ask Jeff for his question on the mental health part?
Sure, that'd be fine. Jeff?
Oh, no, that's not necessary. I can hold my comment until later. The reason I raised my hand quickly is because I wanted to ask for a hard copy of this list. just because I had missed the beginning of your explanation. But I see now that you sent it right before the meeting, so I can catch up and then I'll join the discussion afterwards.
The next part I have is higher education, workforce development. I know we were just discussing this earlier, but what we do see here in Connecticut is that there is a lack of pathway for interpreters to become certified. And there's a difference in terms of training here in Connecticut versus getting to the point of certification. And the largest body of that provides the certifications here in Connecticut, which you have to have, is by Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. And in order to have that, you need to have that in order to interpret in medical settings. And this is kind of where our area of need is here in Connecticut, is medical settings and legal settings. But we're seeing, in medical settings, sometimes it's life or death. And what we need is a pathway to support interpreters, both hearing and deaf. And I can explain a little bit more of what it looks like for deaf interpreters and hearing interpreters, but we need interpreters all across the board, just more of them, to meet the need that is here in Connecticut. And right now, this sort of explains the process, but it can take somebody about 5 years to become certified. And that's only because it's a 2-part test. You have 5 years to gain experience. It's sort of expected that someone would need about 5 years of experience to pass this national certification test, and just letting the state know that there's no support for that 5 years. Once they get the training and the knowledge and they can pass the first portion of the test, we're not hearing that that's a real issue. What we're hearing is getting the experience and the training to be able to pass that performance part, which it's kind of an issue of, okay, how do you get interpreters to have that experience in order to pass the exam to be able to interpret in medical settings? So that's something to consider. And what we've suggested is that possibly have a program to help people to meet the requirements to even take the exam, to pass what's needed for this exam, and then also maybe to expand the definition of accredited interpreter training program, maybe include special programs that are specifically for deaf people who would like to become interpreters. Also specific programs that include people who already have language, such as children to deaf adults, adult children to deaf adults, who already have that language piece, to come through basically an express pathway through a expedited interpreter training program. Because a lot of our current interpreter training programs or program focuses a lot on language development, which if we focused on the population that already has language, then maybe we can kind of get them ready to become interpreters and get them out into the field. So here's just a couple examples and resources on that. Also with higher ed, of course, there's, again, the website, the knowledge of what's out there. Some other websites do include basically how to become an interpreter on their information websites on top of all the deaf services. So maybe if there was just more information out there on generally just for, resources for deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind. Yeah, I'm basically copying what everybody's been saying about the website and just including information about higher ed onto that website. And last for higher ed is the lack of medical interpreter training. So a lot of the complaints that we hear are that interpreters are just not qualified to do medical interpreting. And the understanding is that you may be trained to do sign language interpreting in, say, educational settings, but there is no training in the state of Connecticut to interpret in medical settings, which includes different vocabulary, a different approach in medical settings, knowing, practitioner codes, HIPAA, all these things that come into consideration in the medical field. And right now we have no training for interpreters in that medical field here in Connecticut. And so we believe that if there were some sort of support and training for interpreters to become maybe better qualified in medical settings, then people in mental health settings who are deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind, mental health and medical settings would have better qualified interpreters. So that's our input on that for higher ed and interpreter. I'm sorry, not interpreter standards and mental health standards. That's it for now.
So Maritza, let me just say again, thank you, thank you, thank you. All the work that you put into this is so, so appreciated. And I really want sincerely for you to hear that from me and my colleagues. We really do appreciate it. You know, we're the policymakers, but we're not the boots to the ground, and you are. So it's really helpful with your input, and you really put a lot of work into this. So I can't thank you enough for that. Jeff?
Thank you. Yes, firstly, I would like to thank Marissa as well for your comments and for this dense information. I mean, it's rich and it's on target and it's comprehensive. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate that from my end. And of course, I'm going to spend some more time looking through it a bit more thoroughly after this meeting. But I'm wondering, so now our focus is mental health, right? I just want to make sure I'm caught up and on track here, because I do have a few things I'd like to raise in regards to that. I know I missed last month's meeting, but I did catch up with a couple of folks who had attended. And I also saw the video proceedings of what had occurred after the meeting. And based on some of the discussion, I have to say I do agree that, you know, a lot of agencies do provide specific services for deaf and hard of hearing folks. The services are there, that is a fact. However, a couple of the issues are, you know, is there communication access to those services? Are those services being communicated out broadly to the community? Does the community know that they're available? Definitely not. And I think that's an issue that we're already aware of and that Representative Abercrombie has mentioned earlier as well. We need to have these services communicated more effectively to the community. But the other issue, I would say, I guess I would call it direct communication. Some agencies will say, yes, we have services, but they have to be provided through an interpreter. And a lot of deaf folks don't want to go through an interpreter. They want to have a direct connection, a direct line of communication with their therapist or with their doctor, someone who can understand them directly. I guess maybe a situation I can use as an example here is a crisis that we had at ASD. And I mean, it was an emergency. We had police who were here. They had to restrain a student in order to get things under control. That happens from time to time. So now I have to say, okay, hold on, let me get the counselor, and oh, hold on, let me get the interpreter, and we're bringing everyone here. And the student is stuck on the ground, unable to communicate. And so now, you know, we have to try and have the interpreter speak to the counselor, and then the counselor speak back. And the student is all the while on the ground. If they were able to sign directly to the counselor right away and let someone know, hey, I'm safe now, you can let me go. That would be so much more efficient. And that's something that occurs almost every day here. That's what we're really lacking in for services in Connecticut. So yes, maybe agencies do have resources. Maybe that's true, but I would call them indirect services. And we need to change that paradigm. We need to provide direct services for people to be really connect with their clients and for deaf folks to be able to connect with their providers. That's a real struggle here in Connecticut. And I think the mental health bill really needs to amplify that issue. That communication with professionals needs to be direct communication. It can't be through an interpreter or through a screen or what have you. It's really lacking here in the state of Connecticut. Another exemplar that I think is really important to share is a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, The Connecticut Mobile Crisis Mental Health Team, they travel around the state. They go to different schools or, to provide crisis intervention on an immediate basis. So I learned about that through DCF. So I thought, wow, that's so great. So when we had a crisis here, I went ahead, I called this mobile crisis team. They came running into the emergency and said, oh, everyone here is deaf. Okay, we have to call an interpreter. And it took 2.5 hours for the interpreter to get there, all the while the student is in crisis. If we're supposed to be having a mobile crisis response team, why not have a few deaf folks who would be able to come in and handle that crisis in an instant? It would be over in minutes if they could just communicate directly. So I saw this problem, so I decided to communicate with the folks who were in charge. I honestly don't remember now, but the folks at DCF who who were in charge of that at that time. And I said, why don't we have deaf folks, who could provide these services, these mobile responses, and not just at ASD, but I mean, across the state, if there are deaf children or deaf parents or deaf family members who have an emergency, we would be able to have people available to respond to these crises. And their response was, well, sorry, you'll have to try and work with the agency who's responsible for deaf folks. So then we called them and, oh, nope, there's funding caps. And it just was, brick walls every attempt I made. And so we decided to set up our own internal crisis response team within the school and not use this statewide one. And then Governor Lamont, I think just this past spring, announced $2 million to support deaf and hard of hearing, deafblind community through the AARP fund. And I was like, wow, I was so impressed that he thought to include our community. And so we decided to make a proposal from ASD that amplified and focused in on these mental health issues, specifically in terms of children. Now, oh, sorry about that. Somebody was calling and I couldn't see my screen anymore. So the Connecticut Association for the Deaf also developed a list of issues pertaining to mental health for adults. So we had the full gamut covered as a part of this proposal, including a budget. We made the proposal to the state and haven't heard a word since. There's been not a single update. And we have children who are suffering every single day with mental health issues who can't obtain services. Now, I know that this is a statewide issue too. And so my ultimate point is, what can we as this work group ultimately do? I mean, even if people are saying, well, we don't have funding. Well, then what is this $2 million that Governor Lamont announced for? What are they supposed to be used for? I mean, I know we need funds for literacy development. The pandemic has caused serious regression for a lot of deaf students. The impacts of that have just been absolutely horrible. So can we start talking about not only how we can improve these things, but also, how does the mobile crisis team work? How does literacy development work? How are all of these things going to work? That way we can actually get this funding to be in line with these issues. But in summary, those were my comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm going to go to Harvey and then I'll respond.
Yes, okay, thank you. So first of all, I also would like to applaud Marissa for doing such a fine job this morning and for advocating for interpreters in mental health settings and mental health settings. I'll have to also read those notes a bit more thoroughly after the meeting. So as a part of Connecticut Association of the Deaf, I was a part of the development of that proposal for those AARP funds. In making sure that we proposed usage of those funds for the deaf, hard of hearing and deafblind community. So that has been submitted, but like Jeff said, we have not heard back yet at all either. And I thought the idea was to involve different agencies and stakeholders, independent living centers, Connecticut Association of the Deaf, to make sure that we were covering all of the basics in terms of reaching out to the community and making sure we were reaching out to all facets of the community. Now, the proposal to the legislature that I was involved with as a member of that task force, where we were addressing this issue, the proposal really was proposed in two parts. One was pertaining to the mental health rights of deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind folks. And the other part was pertaining to the statewide agency for communication coordination. You know, any agency that provided various mental health services on a state level, having some coordinated effort to make those services well known and have them available through sort of a regional approach. Now, I know that the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind community is considered a low incidence population. So typically that means in order to receive services, you have to go to a more central hub, a central location, which requires a way to get there. It requires time and money to get there. That's why we were proposing having a regional approach, so at least some satellite sites would be a bit closer to various folks throughout the state. And they would be able to receive services. But it seemed like it didn't fly during this last legislative session, but I did want to thank Representative Abercrombie for her efforts in raising this proposal and making these needs known. But now I'm sort of left feeling like, what more can we do? Because there is really no statewide coordination. There aren't being any regional efforts made to address some of these issues, you know, in addition to the shortage of interpreters. So I'm genuinely asking, what can we do as next steps? How can we proceed?
So I'm going to go on to Kim, and then we'll try and address all of these issues.
Hi, it's been really great to be part of this working group, and I've learned so much, and that I'll be able to take back to my agency. But one sort of recurring theme that I've heard sort of throughout a lot of the discussions, as well as today, is a method for people to be able to enforce their rights to get interpreters or to get whatever kind of accommodations they might need, whether they be in the hospital or with their doctor's office or mental health and higher ed. And we had sent some language to the committee to modify our current public accommodation statutes. And I think that would be an important tool to try to accomplish some of what you're trying to accomplish. The public accommodation statutes that were written for the state were written before the ADA became enacted. And they do not clearly say that reasonable accommodations must be made. We've interpreted that to be so. And of course, there's always the ADA, but I think it would be important to have a state law that requires public accommodations as well as state agencies to provide reasonable accommodations such as interpreters. So if folks are denied that kind of accommodation, that they have squarely a place to complain with the CHRO.
Yes, thank you for that, Kim. I think that, so there's going to be a lot of information that's going to be sent to all of you. So if you want to take a look at it and then give our thoughts on the areas that are important to you, that would be really appreciated by the three chairs. And you can send everything through Heather because it's easier for her to be the gatekeeper of all of that and then be able to distribute it to Representative Fusco and Representative Comey. So that would be great. So any other comments before I kind of try to respond to Jeff and Harvey on their comments?
I just have a quick question. Quick question.
Yes, Representative.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. If, when Harvey speaks about the regional efforts, about a regional approach, can he expand just a little bit on that? What he means by the regional approach?
Harvey, can you explain what was in the bill as far as the regional approach for Representative Fusco?
Yes, sorry about that. Yes, of course. So oftentimes, with a shortage of qualified resources in the Hartford area or greater Hartford area. So that greater Hartford metro population area and the surrounding area seems to have the most capable population of professionals that are able to work with the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind. And this seems to be the case in other states where we just don't have enough, where the services are, where we want to train the professionals, talk to the specialists without needing an interpreter. So, when you look at the mental health recommendations and the different places where they talk about the the culturally adaptional professionals, meaning a professional who is not only trained in the mental health issues, but at the same time also able to communicate and understand the culture of the particular patient requiring services. That would then enable them to provide effective communication and support to these people who are in need of the services. Unfortunately, there are not many who are trained to specifically work with the deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind in the mental health field currently. Meaning that we are using the services of an interpreter, which unfortunately would then need to kind of break up the communication because of that need to have the interpreter, where the interpreter is now representing their thoughts and feelings. And when that's conveyed through an interpreter, it's not direct communication. And it does, unfortunately, excuse me, just one moment. It does really encourage a lapse of communication and of cultural information, which means that, at that point, problems arise, and it doesn't allow for a great, professional patient environment. Sorry. Somebody's calling me, which is making me lose my screen. So it's basically a twofold thing where we, if we go from a regional approach, we can really allow these patients to have a strategic plan in place for placement as far as different parts of the states go, and then allow their needs to still be met as much as possible. And that was just kind of one idea we had come up with, but it would require really good planning and really good selection of the appropriate placement for the resources.
And Barbara was just saying, specifically talking about independent living centers.
Gary, thank you for that.
And let me just follow up on that, just so Representative Fusco, because he doesn't sit on Human Services. So in the last legislative session, you saw the bill that was proposed from the advisory council around the mental health. We didn't know enough about what agencies were currently doing. And that's why when they started to testify around the bill, it got very confusing, and that's why we decided not to take any action on it at that time. And the decision was made, I made the decision as the House Chairwoman to put together this working group, because I really wanted to dig deep into what does that mean. And one of the things we did find out was that there is lack of workforce for this. And that's why it's been centrally more located, like in Hartford for services, because it's easier to go around the state to go to one central location. Now, is that fair to all of the individuals? Absolutely not. But when you don't have a workforce to support it, I think that the agencies are trying to do at this point the best that they can. And I think a lot of what's being said right now is a workforce issue. Let me just put it out there before I respond to Jeff and Harvey on some of their comments. Anyone else that would like to comment on this particular subject matter? So, oh, go ahead, Jeff.
I just had two things. I did want to respond to Marissa. I know that there is a list of deaf and culturally deaf, or people who understand deaf, counselors, social workers. That is currently a resource that CAD has created, and this is being agreed upon here. So I know that Louisa may have that information. So Marissa, if you do want that, it may be, beneficial to you to have Louisa share that with your committee. I know that it is something that has, I've had experience working with some of them, and that has been great. On a different note, I was reading the Hartford Current this morning, and I know that there's a big discussion yesterday in regards to the mental health and kind of the information that's happening out there as far as the social emotional learning inside schools, the impact, and so on. ASD as an agency is not capable of obtaining any of that funding, because their response is, you're getting the PPP money. And for us, I feel like we need to back up the bus, because yes, we did get that PPP money, but that money was allocated to not support the schools. It was to support the services provided. So we did not get any, we didn't lay off any workers. We kept all of our workers, and we were fortunate enough not to have to do that. But we did that by using that PPP funding in order to maintain our workforce. That money wasn't used towards any sort of educational resources. But apparently, because we did get that, we don't qualify for the ESSA or any other federal funding. And, where we're here doing what the state wants us to do, and they're basically now saying, oh, well, you need to use the funding that you have, but we're saying how, and that's really been a struggle to kind of figure out how to move forward on this front. We have had to use some of our ideas through the AARPA money, because that does seem like feasible at this point in time.
So let me go through some of the things that, Jeff, that you raised. I was part of that appropriations meeting yesterday with all of the agencies, because I sit on appropriations, and I'm also the subcommittee chair of human services for appropriations. So all of those dollars that we had given to the agencies, we as appropriations want to see how they're being spent. So a couple of things. So let's back up a little bit to the EMPS. So EMPS, I'm very familiar with, because I've worked with DCF for many years on that. We also have an MPS, which is under DMIS, which we put funding in to go 24/7. They are actually just signing their contracts now with the providers to be able to go 24/7. So a couple of things. I will be more than happy to reach out to both agencies and find out how they're addressing this community, as far as the deaf-blind community and hard of hearing community, to see who are the boots to the ground when there is a call. So that I could very easily make a call and then send out what the response is to this group. Sometimes it's just not realizing that you're not supplying a certain population with a service that makes these agencies wake up. So that's an easy conversation to have. The other thing you talked about was the $2 million that the governor had offered as a grant proposal for this community. I'm going to say, shame on you, Jeff, because here you've got the people from appropriations sitting right here, and you never sent me an email asking me, where's the money? That's a quick conversation for me to have. So I'm going to call the governor's office. And
you should have a copy. I think I did send one over.
when did you send it?
Oh, it was a while back. I think we had our first meeting with Amy Porter and Barbara, in the spring. And that proposal was made, and then we had followed up in October and didn't hear anything since. But I would be happy to send you a copy of both of those proposals. That's an easy thing to do for sure. So I'll do that.
Yeah, I didn't know that you hadn't received the money, so I apologize if I missed that email, because I really do try to stay on top of that. But I will call OPM after this call and find out where those dollars are, how they're being spent, and how much is left, and see if you qualify, what they did with your application. So that's an easy fix that I'd be more than happy to take a look at for you. And then the third piece is some of the federal
I will
money.
go ahead and send over that email to you after this meeting as well, both of those proposals, so that you can have a copy of them in case they did get lost. But yes, thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And then the third piece was the federal dollars. So we can look into, because SDE was before the Appropriations Committee yesterday, around all of these pockets of money that they received, and then also the pockets of money that the school districts received. So I can very easily make a call to them to find out about ASD qualifying. The only thing I want you to be aware of, and we found this conflict with private providers also, is in the definition, and this may not apply, but I just want you to be aware that it could be why you're not eligible for the dollars. We found out through some of the other ARPA dollars that were allocated to the state that if providers received the PPP money, they weren't eligible under the federal guidelines for those dollars. It's not us. We don't have the choice in it. We have to adhere to the federal law. And this was a big issue with the providers too, because the providers were saying, hey, we wouldn't have taken that little bit of PPP if we knew that the feds were going to be sending the state all of these millions of dollars, which would have been more beneficial for us. So it was sort of one of those things that even the federal government, right? We didn't know when COVID started, where it was going to end up. We didn't know financially that our state was going to have to shut down, right? So then when they started to give these dollars out, I think, in their defense, only because I know how we think as a state, right? Because I represent the state, they thought that they were doing the best that they could in the right thing. And now we fast forward and find out that there's all this money, but oh, by the way, we tied your hands to be able to get it. So I will call the commissioner and talk to Charlene after this and find out what the guidance was from the feds and see if perhaps you qualify for any of the $1.4 billion that they still have out there, and see what you would have to apply for it, what the process would be. But that's the only lock that I could see that may be in place, is because of the PPP, which, like you said, has nothing to do with the education of the students that you're trying to support. My one question to you is, Jeff, I would assume that you talk to your colleagues throughout the state who are also a school like yours. Have any of them told you that they qualified for the federal money that came through education, even though they got PPP money?
Well, I have had some discussions. Some schools have been able to get both of the funding. Others have not. I did talk to the federal legislator, Connecticut's, in regards to this issue. I reached out, but I haven't heard back. I do tend to get a similar answer, which is I'll look into it. So we'll see if that will ever come up later. But I can say that the State Department of Education's response was that we were eligible to get that money through the school district. And I was like, dealing with 169 school districts. I can't contact each one of them to get a small portion of their funding in order to, get it on our campus. In order to put that effort into that is ridiculous by the time we actually would get that funding. So I guess the, really issue is they're suggesting I reach out to each of the school districts, and then if the private schools are looking to get that funding, they would have to basically chase the districts in order to get that, is what the answer I got was.
So let me repeat back what I just heard you say to make sure that I understand what you're saying. So what SDE said to you is, because of your students come from all of the different communities in the state, they expect you to reach out to those school districts and say, hey, I'm educating your student. I'm eligible for some of your essay dollars, which is what they're called. And they want you to kind of ask for a grant from the individual school districts. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
So-
and this is like with the Title II and Title IV funding, the issues that came up in that it required us to reach out to each district. Luckily, I did have a great partnership with West Hartford Public Schools, and they took care of our Title II and IV funding. But for the Title I and II funding, you do have to do it through each individual school district, and looked into it prior. And it was just so difficult to chase each of that, chase all that funding. So we kind of just had to put it on the back burner. And this seems to be the same thing now. It's the system, it's been created, is how we've seen it. So.
Okay, I can call the commissioner and find out if there's a way to streamline those dollars from SDE directly to you. Do you have by chance, so I guess my question to you is, if SDE expected you to reach out to each of the individual school districts that your students come from to ask for these dollars, did you have a proposal prepared to ask for the dollars? Like, how would you, and I don't know the process, so I apologize if I'm not asking it right, but when you ask school districts for dollars, right, to be able to support your students, right, which are their students, right, do you normally have to do it through a application process, or are there grants that you get from school districts that you just apply for? Like, how does this normally work for you, if it is a process at all?
To be honest, I don't have a direct answer for that question. When I heard that, I basically just look at it and think, okay, does that mean I have to go through the bureaucracy of every school district to find out whether it's a president, a principal, a director? Each has their own process. And then I'd have to adhere to each of those processes, which is what I mean as far as it being such a waste of time in order to get that funding at this point. So to be honest, because of all of that red tape, I didn't even look into how I would go about it.
And how did you get dollars from, I think you said, and I apologize if I'm mixing up my community, did you say that you were able to get some dollars from West Hartford? And how did you get those dollars from them?
Well, yes, for the Title III and IV, and that was in regards to the professional development for the staff. And that was just something that had already been set up prior to my time here on campus. It was a partnership. So the system that is working with West Hartford has been working. And so that's great. But once there are new things that have come up or been implemented, it all, starts from ground one again. So fortunately, with that agreement, a partnership that we have with West Hartford, they pay a portion of that for our staff. But again, I was hoping hopefully what I'm talking about today doesn't affect that now and make that an issue as well. I'm kidding.
No, there shouldn't be a problem there. So let me ask you this, before I call SDE, right? Can you, and you can do this after this call, can you, two things. Can you let me know what kind of money you're asking for, right? Is it $1 million, $2 million, 500,000? And then how would you use these dollars to support your students, right? Because I think what you're saying is that these would be direct supports to the students. So maybe it's bringing in mental health counselors for a short period of time to help, with evaluating your students, right? Or it could be maybe offering some courses or something like that that you normally don't do, but you could do in a short period of time. Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes.
Because I need to know what I'm asking SDE for.
Right. So, we had talked about the SEL curriculum. And it's really more in regards to the SEL curriculum, because right now there is no curriculum imposed for deaf and hard of hearing students created. So finding the resources to make that available and accessible to the students, mental health support. So yes, I will work on that. I know it's 11:30 and I've tied up a lot of the time in this meeting, but I just, do want to reiterate the fact that I really appreciate all of you and the 3 representatives for being part of this and really encouraging us to support and move forward with this. So I'll discuss this further with Barbara and, develop some sort of a response for you as far as my thoughts on this. Okay.
Yeah, that would be really helpful because I want to make sure as I go to, so what I'm going to do is I am going to call the commissioner after this and just have a conversation with her about that. And then as you prepare your document for me, I will tell her that this will be following up, that I am just investigating why you aren't able to get some direct grants from SDE to help support your students. And it might be, Jeff, it might be as simple as, and I don't know if we're doing this, are they doing grants? Are all the allocation of the dollars being allocated only for public education also and not for private schools? I don't know. That might be the issue. Whether it's fair or not, that's not what I'm commenting on. I'm just trying to think of why, you might not have been eligible. But I have no problem talking to SDE and seeing if there's some way for you to be able to apply for a grant. Any further questions? Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for your support as always. Really appreciated.
No problem. We really do want to support our students. And your school does a phenomenal job and we couldn't do what we do without you guys. So thank you, really. Further questions or comments on this particular mental health area? Harvey? Oh, no. Okay. Anyone? Anything that we weren't thinking of that you were like, oh, aha moment. I didn't think about that. Susan. And then Barbara.
Hi, this is just quick. On the mental health bill, it specifically states that they will accept the credentials for Massachusetts. Are there any other surrounding states that we would accept the credentials from?
So that has not been raised in this working group. I think that because a lot of these members are on the advisory group, I think that that's a good question for them to ask the advisory group because they were the ones that made up the proposal of who they thought was acceptable at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you.
I think Barbara had her hand raised and then Jim.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention it would be great to follow up about the ARPA funds, because we did raise this proposal and the Connecticut Association of the Deaf, as well as ASD, we both sent in proposals. And one of the issues that was raised was about those regional services that would be accessible for the deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind community, mental health services, transportation, communication, sort of having hubs in these regions for all of these services to be provided through. So accessing services can be a challenge without COVID. It was only further exacerbated by that. So having these independent living centers, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can utilize what we already have in place, and just make them more robust and make them support these communities in different ways in this regional approach. That way, deaf folks, deaf senior citizens aren't having to drive across the state to get services. I'm just a bit disappointed that we haven't, that you never got to see that proposal that we had drafted for those funds. I hope that, I'm happy to send it to you as well in case you don't have it. But I know we had made that proposal back in spring, and like Jeff had said, we hadn't heard anything. And so we're not sure really what happened in terms
Yeah,
of those
I'll check
proposals.
into, whoops, I'm sorry. I don't know who that was.
Oh, I was just saying in terms of those proposals, no worries.
Yeah, I can't speak to it. I don't know, you know, I heard the governor offer those dollars. I didn't follow up with it because no one, you know, kind of said, Kath, what did they do with those dollars? So I have no idea. I will reach out to OPM and my liaison that I work with under the Human Services to find out, is there any money left? What did they do with it? You know, I didn't even hear from the independent living centers, which is kind of unusual, which might be that they did get the bulk of those dollars. I don't know, to tell you the truth. So I'd be more than happy to look into it, and then I'll have Heather send out an email to everyone, just letting you know what the governor's office said. Jim, and then Sandy.
My comments are
That would
not
be great.
related
Thank you.
to the ARPA funding issue, so I can hold them if Sandy's are relevant to the ARPA topic.
Sandy, do you want to go next and then Jim?
Yes, hello. Good morning, everyone. I know I've been a bit quiet today, which might be odd for me, but I'm very happy to be here. When you get a chance to look at this proposal, you will see that there is project line 108. That is a line item. It's budgeted $2 million for the deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind services. I'm just letting you know that, just so you know exactly which line to sort of get right to the point when you're reviewing that document. Now, when those funds were allocated, they were allocated to different programs. They were awarded to different programs, but the deaf line item, that line specifically, it doesn't have an amount allocated there. And like others have stated, Connecticut Association of the Deaf did submit a proposal, and we never heard anything. I think the last time we submitted again was June, or maybe the very beginning of July, because I know that was the start of the fiscal year. But yes, it's line 108 when you're referencing that document.
And when you say referencing that document, you're talking about, and I apologize because there's a lot of different documents this year with the dollars. So you're talking when the governor offered the $2 million grant.
For the ARPA funds, it was the project line 108. You know, they have enumerated various projects in that that document. Ours was project 108 was our number.
Okay. I'd be more than happy to look into that. I apologize. Somebody else. Oh, Jim, sorry. I lost track.
Not a problem. I just wanted to, this is not the right time. I'm happy is to give significant credit to Marissa and her colleagues for the document that they did put together. We are currently reviewing it. And I just wanted to say that we are just on the initial review. I'm not sure we would be aligned that all of them are appropriate for legislative action in a short session. We think we need to sort of spend the time to, when we look at medical providers, that we're talking anywhere from a hospital to a physician office with a variety of different federal requirements that will apply to each. So I think it is a tremendous document. We are aligned with a lot of it that is there, but there are some that we're going to need to spend the time to look through and figure out whether they fit through the lens of what we can do in a short session. And I just wanted to just point that out up front.
Yeah, and Jim, that you know that sometimes what we do is we'll introduce legislation in a short session just so that we can get a public hearing on it if the chairs allow it, so that it preps us for the following session, which is the long session, so that it's not a shock to anybody, because we know that sometimes legislation takes a few legislative sessions before it gets passed. So, you know, don't be nervous that, you know, if we do introduce things, you know, it's not necessarily means it's going to go forward. It may just be to start the conversation, right? Because even though we're having great conversations here, and we've got a lot of expertise on this working group, at the end of the day, right, there's also the agencies that have to be involved and have to comment on it. If there's funding that needs to be appropriated for it. So there's still another process, the legislative process, on how bills get passed. So yeah, I mean, and if you feel that it's, some of it is, you know, that you're not able to do it, you have every opportunity to testify what the challenges are. So I don't want anybody to get nervous, you know, that either it does get raised, or if it doesn't get raised, I'm going to say it again so everybody's aware, it's not up to me unless it goes through my committee. If some of these bills, which I think they will, have to go through public health, it's up to the public health chairs if they want to raise them. I have a great relationship with both of them, and we'll have the conversation, but I can't guarantee in a short session that they will.
Understood. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments on the mental health? Seeing none, I thought this was a great conversation. And the last area that was on our topic for discussion are interpreter standards. So if anybody wants to open it up as to—
Harvey here.
Yep,
Me.
Yes, this is
Right,
Harvey.
yeah, Harvey, can I just finish? Okay. Go
Okay,
ahead,
sure.
Harvey.
You can finish.
No, I was just going to say that I think Marissa gave us some places to start, which I think is a great thing. That's all I was going to say. So with that, I'll open it up to the floor, and Harvey, please proceed.
Okay, so at our previous meeting, I believe it was in September, we had raised a discussion. There was two parts in terms of these interpreter standards that we were discussing. The first part being working on clarification and improvement of the current statutes in place. The second part was dealing with the interpreter standards board. You know, a resource for helping one obtain certification, etc. And so we had felt at the time that the group wasn't prepared to discuss the second part of that conversation. So we had honed in on part one, and we had a great dialogue. I'm not sure if Representative Abercrombie, you were present for that specific conversation. I believe you might have had another commitment at that time. But it was a good dialogue, and there was a few questions. We were able to clarify a few things, share some information. And it seemed that the consensus was that we as a group recognized that there needed to be enhancements or improvements made to the current statutes. And some of those revisions were sent out to the group. And I know we also sent it to your staff person. The last name is Ferguson Hull. Oh, Heather, right. Sorry, I blanked on her first name for a second. Heather had sent those documents out to the broader group. Now, the pieces that are in red, the lines that are in red that you see are what's different. And so what we're saying is that we understand that Disability Rights Connecticut can't handle grievances or all of these issues for a variety of different reasons. So we wanted that section of the statute to be replaced with something saying to designate an agency who would provide those protection or grievance services for the state of Connecticut. And we had said that it could be any business entity or interpreting agency / service provider within or outside of the state. Employing any entity employing interpreters or providing interpreting services within the state of Connecticut would need to ensure that said interpreter that they would be providing would be in compliance with the requirements stipulated in this statute. So I think if we were to replace that section with what I just said, it would help to ensure that whatever interpreters were hired for the state, we could at least have that guarantee, or that we would feel ensured that they were in compliance with what we expect and stipulate in this law. Now, I wanted to bring this up because I'm wondering if this is something we could address in the short session, because it's really more of a clarification of current statute. So that's just what I was curious about. And if we could have a discussion about that, that'd be great.
So 2 parts. I did get the document that was in red, and we did give it to our LCO to do a comparison to what the current statute is. So we did do that. As far as having a designee, I can tell you right off the top of my head, that's going to trigger a fiscal note. And being in a short session, we don't have any new dollars to be able to pay for that position. An RFP would have to be done, and then all qualified providers or agencies would have the ability to apply for it. But I can tell you right now that it would trigger a fiscal note, which, quite frankly, being that it's the second part of the budget, there's no new dollars to acknowledge that position. Sandy?
Yes. Again, good morning. This is something I've kind of given a lot of thought to in regards to this interpreter bill that we're proposing. I mean, this has been ongoing, several years worth of thoughts, and, the interpreter bill being passed. At the same time, working with various groups in partnership and getting these various perspectives, the interpreters themselves, the deaf individuals, deafblind, hard of hearing, kind of all coming together and working together, and Harvey really working to develop this recent bill and changes in the proposal. It's interesting, last week we received an email from Heather, and it was something that was shared with us, and their interpreter proposal for the Medicaid interpreting agencies and what they were hoping for their standards, regulations. And in looking at that, it was interesting because it does seem like they are trying to set up a standard that's statewide as well, in lieu of using the law to manage the specifics. Instead, this regulatory board, I think it's referred to as a different name, but serving the same purpose as, we are, that we've been kind of speaking to. So in there, it's mentioned that, they too are really having a difficult time passing that. The deaf perspective has been really hard to kind of sell this to people, where they just don't know what the issues are in regards to the deafness and the interpreting, barriers and so on. So it was a hard sell. So that was one thing I wanted to touch on, but, so basically we thought, okay, let's kind of let go of that standard board and kind of, look past that and put it on hold for right now, because we really feel like it was such a priority for us to kind of work on the standardized issues like Harvey mentioned. Becoming responsible for someone who's going to become responsible for the complaints, and the Aging and Disability Services, they're deaf advocates right now. Alvin, who's with us, he had kind of added that piece into there as well. But I do think it's important that we make sure that the issue is clear in regards to the CDI, certified deaf interpreters, and adding that into that community interpreter definition. It was removed previously, and I think it is important to put that in, especially, interpreters who are like here for this meeting, for the governor, for community services, GSS applications, any sort of state agency. It's very important to put that wording back in. And I believe I had sent that, revision to that proposal out back on, I think it was last week in December. I think, not sure if it was the 9th or the 10th, but I do think that you would have that new proposal. And it's really just a tweaking of the language, the definition of a deaf-blind individual, the definition of a CDI, the definition of community interpreters, and kind of that little clarification being added into that proposal. And whether you have anything you feel needs to be added to, or you feel it needs to be held off for the long session, that was what we had from our committee.
So Heather, what did you send the group? I'm not sure I'm understanding what document you sent to them.
I believe it was the original proposal that Harvey had sent, and then it was resent, and that was the one that I believe I sent to Marie for the side-by-side comparison. But I apologize if I'm incorrect.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same document. I did see that document. Marie, are you still on this call?
Marie had to go, unfortunately, and so
Okay.
she will obviously get her the summary, and she can watch the recording on YouTube as well. So she has sent her apologies.
So so I know we sent it off to her to do a side-by-side, because I think Sandy, and I can't remember totally, but there was an issue with the definition of community that isn't used in statutory language. And that's why I was hoping Marie was on here so that she could tell me what the issue was and why we had to take that out. I don't remember, to tell you the truth. I remember it was an issue. That's all I remember. Heather, did we get a response from Marie on that document?
Yes, she did respond, and I believe I shared it with the chairs, but I can resend it as well.
Okay. So Sandy, I just want to make sure that we were all talking about the same document, because there's a lot of documents out there. So we're going to take a look at, I saw that document, we saw the red, we sent it off to Marie to do a side-by-side with what the current statutory language is. And there was some issue with the language with the definition of community, and I can't remember off the top of my head. But we will send you the response from Marie, our attorney, as to why that was taken out. And then we will look at the other parts that are in red and see what there is. Give me 1 second, Harvey, and I will call on you. We will, lost my thought for a moment, I'm sorry. We will let you know what the end result is with the recommendations of that. Harvey?
Thank you. Yes, I did want to share, though. I believe, if memory serves me correctly, 2 years ago, when we were looking into this legislation for the legislation, they had reached out to me and Mary Sue Owens. And I think at that point in time, they had asked about the community settings. I think it was if you had put in the definition, and then in the body of the legislative proposal, you needed to then include something about the community interpreting. If you did not mention it, it was not able to be added to the definition. I think that was how it was explained to me 2 years ago. So I was just, maybe that is what we need to do. And, we need to kind of maybe add a definition or some sort of clarification to the current proposal where it states that an interpreter who provides any interpreting services outside of educational and medical interpreting is considered a community interpreter. So maybe it's just that language that needs to be added in to kind of define what the community interpreter is. And then that would, I think, carry, because those interpreters do carry most of the interpreting work. Currently, for example, today, the interpreters who are here, they are not required to meet the requirements for educational or medical interpreting, but they are doing community interpreting currently because they are able to meet the basic responsibilities required for the interpreting. So most interpreters do community interpreting, and that is a specialized field as opposed to the medical, mental health, educational interpreters. They have specific terminologies that are associated with each of those fields, whereas in the community interpreting, there's no specific terminology, and it's a variety of interpreting situations that fit our, community interpreting needs. Currently, today is considered a community interpreting assignment, if that kind of gives you some background so you can kind of place kind of what I'm saying here. Thank you.
So what does the word community interpreter, how does that make it different than the interpreters that we already have in statutory language? I'm not understanding why we need a community interpreter language.
We need to define the different roles of interpreters, the different settings that each interpreter may or may not be working within, in order to then confirm the appropriate requirements needed by said interpreter. If it is a hospital setting, then they would need to have a medically certified interpreter. A person who may work interpreting in the school would be considered an educational interpreter. So that educational setting interpreting it's basically a way to decipher and define the role of the interpreter and the skills required to interpret in such settings.
Okay, so I understand that, but I think where I would be concerned is with the shortage of interpreters. Are we tying our hands and giving less resources to individuals in all settings? So in an
it's not any extra requirements. We're not. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And I appreciate your concern. And it's not an extra requirement that's being asked. It is basically just a way to differentiate, where it's the medical, mental health, educational interpreters. They do have specific requirements, but all interpreters need to meet that basic requirement, which then qualifies and enables them to work in a community interpreting setting.
But isn't that part of the standards that's in the statute already?
Yes. No. Well, what they're saying is that there's nothing in the currently there's nothing in there that states anything about community interpreting. But so with that being the case, if you don't get certified in education and you're not certified in the medical field, and you're not certified in the mental health field or legal, what could they do? They could instead work as an interpreter in a community setting only.
Madam Chair, okay, I just want to, so Madam Chair, if I may,
Yes, please.
I think I understand. And Harvey, just maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but so the community setting interpreter is it a baseline skill set, or is it an additional skill set?
Right, that's right.
Correct. It's a baseline skill set. Yes.
Okay, so I think, Madam Chair, looking back on some of my notes that I happen to have, because I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but this was some proposed statutory language change to, and I don't want to start throwing numbers at you, but it was under Title 46A, 33A, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and I remember it being in there. I just don't
Yep.
remember what the hesitation. That's why I wanted Marie on here, because there was something in definitions that we use
Yeah,
to identify different fields, and I don't remember why the community setting definition would limit individuals. So that's why I need to talk to Marie. I remember there was a conversation. I'm sorry, I just can't remember how the conversation went. I'm not saying, Harvey, that we won't do it. I'm just saying I need to look into it.
yeah. I think
No.
my initial reaction is that I think
understand.
there may have been a misunderstanding initially about the community setting, because even for me, I thought perhaps that was maybe you too, Madam Chair, we thought that was perhaps a different skill set, and that there was going to be a concern about the cost and about, having a mandate on the towns, because that's really our community setting, right? And I think there was also a little bit of interweaving there with the ADA compliance as well. But I don't know that those two things are mutually exclusive. I think that there may have been just a general misunderstanding about those standards. So if it's a baseline, I think what they're saying is, if you're not certified for health, for mental health, for legal or medical and so forth, that you could then at least be in a community setting and do that interpreting. If I understand Harvey, right?
Great, thank you, Representative. So when we talk to Marie Grady, you can explain all that.
Marie's awesome. I love her anytime.
I know, we're very lucky. Maritza?
Hello, let me put my hand down. I just wanted to speak a little bit now that we're talking about the interpreter standards. We did have a little bit of or some points to make for the interpreter standards and what we're facing. Just points to put out there. So the first point is, of course, the interpreter registry list. Based on my personal experience, both Louisa and I, she's the president of Connecticut Association of the Deaf, we went to give a presentation to a wonderful big group of deaf people. And I found as I was explaining about this Connecticut registry list, the cards that people get when you're registered with the state registry. Many people who were deaf did not know about this. They did not know that interpreters get issued this card from the state of Connecticut. They did not know that they were allowed to ask interpreters to please present this form of identification. And what I'm feeling, and also through my own experiences of dealing with deaf clients, is I can ask them, okay, what was your experience with a certain interpreter? Do you remember the name or the agency? There's a lack of traceability. And it's hard to keep, interpreting companies and individual interpreters accountable, because no one's required to show anything. You're not required to show your certification or your, registration. And what we're suggesting from DRCT is that where that list is promoted, to basically make it a more visually accessible format. And what we're asking for is pictures of faces, because you're not required to use this and it has your name on it the whole time, the card. We're asking instead, because some people may not be proficient in English or be able to recognize in English what an interpreter's name is or the agency, what we're asking for is faces of the interpreters, so that deaf people are able to recognize which interpreter it was. And then also maybe pictures of interpreting agencies, their logos, because a lot of people who are deaf are able to identify different agencies depending on their logos. And I'll give you an example, if it's okay to share the screen again. Is it Heather? I need to ask for question.
No, you're all set. You can share.
Okay, so I'll just share real quick, just to give you an example of what it's like to work with someone who's limited English proficient and deaf. So I'll pull up the interpreter registry list and I'll go, okay, where do I find the list of registered interpreters? Where's the interpreter card? I have to scroll down until it's right here, Connecticut registered interpreters, find here, and then I can click on the list. It's not predominant. It's not right there. You have to kind of scroll through and look for it. And then I have a list. And I go, do you remember maybe a first name? Do you remember maybe a last name? Do you remember maybe what certification they had? Like, and this, I mean, I'm telling you, it's 19 pages of interpreters. But I'm telling you, it is a headache to work with. I can't tell from this list. I can't contact any of these people from the list. I don't know what interpreting agency they work for. I mean, honestly, it's just a list of names of, and it's hard to be able to hold. And this is what I'm saying is it's hard to hold people accountable when the list itself is inaccessible. And there's no mention about the ADA on this list. There's no mention about, you know, that's why it's hard for, you know, I can tell the medical providers, hey, take a look at this list and find interpreters, but you would have to know what certifications someone would need to interpret in medical settings off the top of your head, which are like, you know, I'm sure you guys all looked at the bill. It's like 8 different certifications. And you have to try and remember that and look at this list and figure out which people work in medical settings, which one works in community settings or mental health settings or legal settings. I mean, so I guess what I'm hoping to drive home is that this list is inaccessible. This setup is inaccessible. It's inaccessible just overall. And then I will add, what's a good proposal? What's a good idea? Maybe I found Utah's website to be quite accessible. It's services that are available for the deaf and hard of hearing and deafblind. They have employment services, ASL interpreters, community services, outreach, hard of hearing, you know, the list goes on. And then here, it's easy to click on find an interpreter. Here you can click on the interpreter directory, and here's all the list of agencies that you can click on, their contact information, phone number, even an email address. And then you can go to search for interpreters. And here you're able to find the name of the interpreter, where, oh, sorry, hold on. I have to wait for it to load. But you're able to find the name of the interpreter, their contact information, hopefully. Sometimes technology does not always work smoothly. But you're able to see what their email addresses, their phone number. You know, I do wish that this had pictures so people can easily find it, but you can enter in a zip code. And, you know, I don't know Utah's zip code, but you can find which interpreter is located within 25 miles of this area and find. Like, what I'm saying is we really got to revamp the process for Connecticut, because a lot of other states are able to find it. And this is very passive. It's all online. It's accessible, you know, people can find it easily, but right now what we have on Connecticut's website is just not that. And that's what I'm hoping to drive home to. I think that was the first part, yeah, of the interpreter standards and just clarifying that. The other part is lack of prioritization for qualified interpreters for different medical settings. This is a large issue because what we're hearing is that people who are in the emergency rooms in hospitals are not getting interpreters. And what we're hearing is that deaf people, deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind people are not getting interpreters. And also we're getting, you know, responses from hospitals that they are trying to call for an interpreters. They are trying to contact interpreting agencies, or they're referred to call 211. Which in my outlook is not a great place to ask, because 211 has not, they have very slim information about interpreting agencies. They don't have the resources. And basically, hospitals can't find interpreters, and people who are deaf are not getting interpreters. And these are real life situations, medical, emergency room, we need interpreters. And so what we're talking about is possibly a multi-tiered system to help meet the highest need for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, so that people aren't concerned that when they need medical care, emergency medical care, that they're not worried that they're not going to get an interpreter. And
let me let Jim, because Jim's been working with a group of individuals around this issue for probably almost a year now. So I would like to give him the opportunity to respond to this.
Sure.
Did we?
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out how to get myself off mute and on camera after 2 years. You'd think I'd be better at it. This was one of the bullets that I read through and had some concerns on operationally how it would work. That if we had somebody who was in need of interpreter in a physician office versus, we had 3 people, one in an emergency department, one in the urgent care setting, and one in a physician office. That if we called a company in which to provide interpreting services, they would be making the decision solely based on the setting of where to send an interpreter. So I understand, because we would be giving emergency care top priority, then urgent care, and then physician care, I believe. But then where would EMS care fall in there? So I understand, and we understand, I think, the goal here, but operationally, I'm not quite sure how it would work. I would be, it would be nice to say that obviously we would like emergency departments to always be the ones that would get the interpreters over in other settings, but I don't think that's appropriate to say, depending on when you call in versus the time of another setting calling in. So I understand the point, and if we had a larger group of interpreters, it might be easier to do. I'm just not sure operationally how it would work and how we would then be having a provider in an urgent care setting. Say I called 3 hours ago, but the person on the way got bumped over, and the person was in the emergency care, but they really had to be transferred to an emergency department because it was actually not indigestion, but an actual heart condition going on. So those are the things that when I read through this one for the first time, I really understand the goal and I appreciate it, but operationally, I wasn't quite sure how it would work.
So let me ask you this. Maritza, and this is for the whole group also. So currently, VRI is used in medical situations, right? Especially, so let's stick to ERs for just a minute, emergency rooms, right? So if I come in to the emergency room with an emergency, right? I'm having chest pains, let's just say that, right? My concern about having, so nothing substitutes a live person. Let me just say that. We all understand that, right? But is there other technologies out there that's better than VRI, that is something that could be used in these settings until a live person could get there? Because you don't have, my concern is this, you don't have time to waste, right? And it's not wasting it, but you don't have time to get a physical person in there, right? Even if they have people with the medical expertise on call, still going to take them time to get there. So is there a better system that we can be using, right, that than VRI at this time.
I will, Marissa, go first. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, well, it's fine. I think that one, it's hard to talk about the gap and lack of interpreters that we have here in Connecticut. It's huge. Even one of the biggest hospitals that I've spoken with, they're using VRI 3 times more than they're using in-person interpreters. And this all comes to a number of, I would say, over 400 times a year they're requesting at just one hospital. Over 400 times they're requesting for interpreting services. And about 100 of that is in person, and 300 of those requests are being fulfilled from VRI. And that's from one of the biggest hospitals. And what the issue that I'm hearing from people who are deaf or hard of hearing is that VRI is not working, and it's being used as a standard now in emergency rooms. That is the go-to for all emergency rooms. That's my understanding. And the people that are calling Disability Rights Connecticut are saying this cannot be sustainable. Something's got to change. These VRI machines, nobody's taking a look at, nobody's ensuring these quality checks, you know, even if, and sorry, Jim, I know you're here on this call, so it's hard to hear this, but sometimes even contacting the hospitals about these issues, no resolution comes, no improvement comes. And so that's why it's bringing it to the attention of the state of Connecticut to say, look, we've got to do something about these VRI machines, because every hospital is going to have a different response, but nothing systemically is being improved, no oversight over the quality of these VRI machines. And the people that seems to be in real high need are these emergency medical situations. And it's really hard. What I'm hearing from deaf people is it's really hard to be bending down, and excuse me if I'm being graphic, bending down, vomiting blood, and being asked to look at a screen for an interpreter at the same time in these situations. I think what people are telling me is that we need a system that when I go into the emergency room, I'm not afraid to go into the emergency room, concerned that I'm not going to be able to communicate with anybody about my medical care, and that they will call for an interpreter when I'm asking for one. And that's sort of the message that I'm relaying to people of saying, look, this is what people who are deaf, hard of hearing, deafblind are experiencing every day. Is I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get the health care that I need, because it doesn't seem like the access that I'm asking for, which is in-person interpreting, is going to be met. And there is no easy solution. I think that this requires a lot of discussion. But I think if you don't discuss about the resources or the lack of resources that you have in the state of Connecticut, people are going to continuously not have any sort of accessible emergency care in emergency medical settings, because the VRI doesn't work and the interpreters are not being called for emergency medical settings. And that's what's happening now.
Okay, Sandy?
Yes, can everyone see me?
Yes.
Okay. So all of the points that have been made, you know, I understand, and they've been detailed in this document as well. 211 is sort of this outdated system that was established when we had the consent decree between the state and the hospitals. They had an emergency on-call system at that time where there was a list of interpreters, where 211 or the hospital could call 211 and quickly get connected with an interpreter who was on call. That way, by the time, so that way the interpreter was able to get to the assignment on time, and it worked. It worked well. I mean, it was a wonderful service that was provided for at least 10 years. And that was because the courts had established that consent decree, that when that expired after the 10 years, there was really no way to sustain or maintain that system. And because it cost money, the consent decree required all of the hospitals to funnel all of, each hospital had to funnel funds into this fund to operate the system. But once that decree expired, they were no longer mandated to do so. And now the system no longer functions. And here we are back to square one, trying to reinvent the wheel again, when we already had a viable solution that could be carried forward from the past. Obviously there are issues of an interpreter shortage and not enough qualified interpreters in the state and what have you. But nonetheless, this system was in existence prior and it did work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Sandy. We have approximately 8 minutes left. I have a hard stop at 12:30 because I have 2 other meetings. So why don't we do this? We have a lot of material before us. Representative Fusco and Representative Comey and myself are going to be going through that material. We're going to be meeting with our LCO to try and draft some of the legislation. We will send out the legislation, or depending how things are working time-wise, we may just send out subject matters for everybody to take a look at, because it's going to take Marie Grady, our LCO, also has process that she has to go through. And come January, she'll be very busy with all of the pieces of legislation that she has to put forward. So we will get you as soon as possible what our thoughts are going forward. I think that some of these conversations are going to have to be longer term. I can't guarantee what we can get done in this session, being that, again, I just want everybody, being quite frank and honest with you. It's all up to the chairs of the committees. That's how a short session works. And then, oh, by the way, there's statutory language as to what we can offer and what we can't offer in a short session. So, and that gets raised up to a higher level than all of us. So when I introduce a bill, it has to go through the system, and there's attorneys that look at it and make sure that we're in compliance with the statutory language for the short term. I do want to say thank you to everybody that has worked really hard on this working group. I do want to say to the advisory council to keep having these conversations, and for the legislation that doesn't get moved forward this session, this is your opportunity to work with legislators to make sure that that gets carried in the 2023 legislative session, so that your needs are being met. I do want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Heather and Christina and Peter, who were the 3 administrators who helped on this working group, especially with keeping the notes and keeping the meetings. And now Heather's compiling. I said to Heather, we need an intern just to help her compile all the notes from this working group and to put together all of the suggestions that we have received from all of you, which has been phenomenal. I don't think we could have asked for a better group of people with expertise in this area than what we had here. I'll be honest with you. I think we got the best of the best here to kind of look at the future and where we need to go as a state with that. Marissa, I see your hand is up.
Sorry, I will make this short. Thank you, and thank you everybody for this. And the last 2 points for the interpreter standards was the trilingual certification, to talk about that. And then also the closing the loophole for interpreters that are not registered on the state for Connecticut that are still allowed to work here. That's something that we are proposing as well for the interpreter standards to sort of close that loophole. So.
That sounds great. So with this, since it's 12:26, I want to really, really thank all of you. I'm going to give my colleague, Representative Fusco, the opportunity to give some closing remarks. I want to wish everybody happy holidays, stay safe, and wishing everybody a great New Year's. Representative Fusco?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, and I echo those statements as well. Everyone have a great holiday and a safe New Year. And I thank you for those accolades, but quite frankly, Madam Chair, without you, we don't push this forward. Though I don't serve on the Human Services now, that I have in the past, so I understand what your workload is like. So for you to take on this tremendous responsibility is just my hats off. I'm really, really thankful and grateful for you. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your support on this, and Representative Comey, who had to get off for another appointment. We work well as a team, this isn't a partisan issue. We're not Congress. We don't have the hostility that's going on at that level. We really do work well together in this state, both sides of the aisle. And so I want to thank you, Representative, for being here and participating, and even coming to the advisory council meetings to hear what the issues are from this community. So with that, thank you, everyone. Have a great holiday, and we will show you the language as we get it drafted.